Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. This is the first community meeting for the West Broadway reconstruction project. My name is Greg Hannafin, and I'm a transportation planner for the City of Somerville's Mobility Division. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are joined tonight by Councillor Judy Pineda-Neufeld. Councillor, would you like to share a few words before we get started?
Sure, thanks, Greg. And welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to start the conversation tonight about West Broadway. I've had constituents come to me and share some of their ideas and thoughts. As you'll hear later, there's going to be a survey as well that's open now and live. But we're eager to hear directly from you. So thank you to the mobility team for conducting this meeting. And this is the beginning of our community engagement process for this project. And welcome again tonight. Thanks for spending your evening with us. So I'll pass it back to, I think, Greg.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, my colleague Kate White will now share some logistics for this meeting.
So folks, we are recording this meeting. We will post a recording of tonight's meeting on the project page, which you can find at somervillema.gov/West Broadway. You'll find that your camera is turned off for the duration of the meeting, and we will enable your microphone when you are speaking, or when you want to speak during the discussion portion. Throughout the meeting, we'll conduct optional polls and interactive questions, and after the full presentation, we'll open the meeting to discussion. We'll first start with questions that have come in through the chat, and then move to spoken comments. You can send your written questions anytime in the chat to me, and I'll read them out loud during the discussion. And if you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, feel free to email transportation@somervillema.gov, or you can call 781-808-8272. So I'm just going to talk through some of this meeting's purpose, outcomes, and process. This meeting is to share information about this reconstruction project and gather feedback on how we can create a safer and more comfortable West Broadway. We want to hear your transportation safety concerns for Broadway and hear your priorities for the future of the street. We will share background on the project, related plans and ordinances, community engagement strategies, design opportunities and constraints, and then wrap up everything with a discussion at the end. Our agenda this evening is to describe a bit about who we are and what we do, talk through why we identified West Broadway for reconstruction, describe what the project encompasses, talk through how community feedback shapes the project's design, describe the existing conditions, discuss how we can make Broadway safer and improve your experience, and talk through the different options we can to do that, and again, wrap up with hearing your initial feedback and questions. So before we get started, we can't introduce everyone individually in this meeting tonight, but we'd really love to learn a little bit more about who's joining us this evening. So we have an optional Zoom poll, so you'll see a window pop up on your screen. Again, totally optional, just helps us all to know a little bit more about who is joining us. So I'm going to read those questions out for us as you see that window pop up. But we'd love to know a little bit of, where in Somerville do you live? And your options to choose could be on West Broadway or within a 5-minute walk or further than a 5-minute walk, or that you don't live in the city. Then we want to see, how do you use the street? And we've got some options for you there too, such as, do you live on the street? Do you work on the street? Is it your primary way to get or leave your home? Do you use it for your commute? And then lastly, just in the last week, what are some of the transportation options that you've used? Did you bike? Did you take your car? Did you take public transit? Did you take a Lyft or Uber, which we classify as a rideshare? Or did you walk? And then we have some other options for questions 2 and 3. So I'm going to just give folks a few minutes to take that Zoom poll. And again, it's just to give time for some folks joining the meeting this evening and for us to learn a little bit more of who is here with us. So I'm seeing about over half of folks participating in the poll. How about I give you all about maybe like a minute more, and then I'll close it up and share back with you all. And again, these are totally optional. You'll see some similar questions in the survey available on the project website. So I'll give you all about maybe 20 more seconds, or close to 100% participation. And then I'll share back. Okay, wonderful. So give 5 more seconds. Okay, wonderful. I'll share it back. So if you can see in front of you, we've got about 18% of folks. And let's just say, and there's a total of 37 attendees, so just have a rough idea of how many are joining us this evening. But 18% of folks share that they live on the street, about half share that they live within a 5-minute walk, 18% say they live further than a 5-minute walk from the street, and about 15% don't live in Somerville. In terms of how you use the street, again, 18% live on it, about 29% share that they use it in their regular work commute. 41% share that it's their primary way to get or leave their home. 68 use the street to go to businesses or a business on the street. 18% use it for services such as going to your dentist, the laundromat, to veteran services. About 44 use it to get to Route 16 or LF Brook Parkway. About 6 use it to get to West Somerville Community School, and 6 to Tufts University, and then we about a quarter sharing other. But if you're interested in taking this question in our survey, we've got more options for you there, as well as you can provide a description for that other choice. In the past week, we've got about 59% have ridden their bike, 79% have taken a car, 53% have taken public transit, 12% has taken Lyft or Uber for a rideshare or taxi, and about 94% of folks have walked or rolled. So thank you all for taking the survey and just letting us know a little bit more about who's joining us this evening. And I'll now hand it back to Greg. Oh,
Thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for participating in the poll. So now I'll introduce our project team and what guides the work that we do in the city of Somerville. We have 2 city departments who manage design and construction of our streets. The Mobility Division operates within the city's Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, or OSPCD, and will be leading the design phase of the project, which is a project phase that we are just beginning now. Representing mobility tonight is myself, Kate White, who you've heard from, who's our outreach and engagement planner, and Adam Polinsky, senior planner. Mobility also works closely with our engineering team throughout the project, and engineering will be taking over as project lead for the construction phase. And from engineering tonight, we're joined by Rebecca Wright, who is the senior project manager for streetscapes. So tonight we are focusing on the specific aspects of the West Broadway reconstruction project. It's important to acknowledge that this work doesn't happen in a vacuum and is guided by a number of citywide policies and plans. And many of those are shown on the slide here. So first we have our Summer Vision 2040, which is the city's comprehensive plan that captures the city's values and goals. We also have the Somerville Climate Forward Plan, which includes policies, programs, and strategies to address climate change. And for streets in particular, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan, our Complete Streets Ordinance, and our newly published Somerville Bicycle Network Plan, which we'll talk about a bit more later in the presentation. In 2020, the city also released the Somerville Vision Zero Action Plan, which is a commitment by the city to eliminate deaths and serious injuries on our streets. The big picture of Vision Zero is that anyone should be and feel safe moving around our city, no matter how you're getting around. Safety and preventing roadway injuries and death is our #1 priority for all of our street projects. So the graphic shown here illustrates how reducing speeds from 40 miles per hour to 30 and 30 to 20 can really make a big difference when a crash does occur. Of course, the goal is to design our streets to reduce the likelihood of serious crashes. So why West Broadway? And why now? Firstly, by West Broadway, we are referring to the section of Broadway that is between Alewife Brook Parkway or Route 16 and Clarendon Ave just before Teal Square. And that is shown on the map here, highlighted in the red box. At a high level, every year the city has funding to make surface level street improvements through the Pavement and Sidewalk Management Program. Conditions of roads and sidewalks, including accessibility or ADA compliancy, are evaluated in conjunction with overall city goals and construction plans. The result of this evaluation is a list of priority streets to be reconstructed, which is published annually. Streets can either receive partial pavement or be reconstructed as a complete streets project, which gives us the opportunity to be more flexible and creative to improve street safety for all modes of travel. And based on the evaluation process, this section of Broadway, West Broadway, was identified as a priority to be reconstructed as a complete street. One of the key factors in this evaluation is where we're seeing the most crashes today. West Broadway is on the city's high crash network, which means that it's a street with some of the highest crash rates in Somerville. West Broadway is also an important connection for communities in West Somerville that have been historically more impacted by crashes and traffic violence, which includes older adults, people of color, and lower income residents. There have been 30 reported crashes on West Broadway between 2018 and 2023, including 4 crashes involving a person walking, rolling, or biking. Using crash reports, we were able to identify that all 4 of these crashes occurred at just 2 locations, the crossing between Clarendon Hill Towers and Stop and Shop, and at the intersection with North Street. Also playing a role in the evaluation for complete streets projects this year was our bicycle network plan, which was published earlier in the year. The plan provides a connected network for people of all ages and ability to bike safely and comfortably to key destinations anywhere in the city. And we call this our bicycle network vision. West Broadway, which is circled on this map, is designated as a priority on the bicycle network vision. Specifically, the bicycle network vision designates most of West Broadway for at least one direction of protected bike lane. Between Endicott Ave and Russell Road, the street is designated for protected bike lanes in both directions, which is important for connecting neighborways on those 2 streets. And neighborways are streets that have less traffic and are more comfortable for biking. And although West Broadway is designated for at least one direction of protected bike lane, that doesn't prevent implementing protected bike lanes in both directions if ultimately that is the preferred design of the project. Also playing a role in the selection of this project is the importance of West Broadway from a number of different transportation contexts. The street is a gateway to Somerville generally, and specifically to businesses on West Broadway and commercial districts in Teal Square and Davis Square. It's also close to other major destinations such as Mass Ave in Cambridge and Tufts University. It's an important transit corridor with several bus routes running along the street and connecting to the Red Line in Davis Square, as well as other destinations along Broadway and the abutting town of Arlington. And it serves as a bicycle connector between the Alewife Greenway path and the Holland Street protected bike lanes and the Somerville Community Path. So let's dig in a little bit more into the bus ridership numbers. In the fall of 2022, there were about 1,500 bus rider trips starting or ending on West Broadway on an average weekday. And these 2 charts are showing on the left the inbound ons and offs, which is the direction heading towards Teal Square. On the right are the outbound ons and offs, which is the direction heading towards Alewife Brook Parkway. And this is showing that clearly the Clarendon Hill Busway, which is on the western end of the project, is a very important stop for transit riders on this corridor. And it's actually one of the most used stops across the city in general. So we've certainly identified West Broadway and in particular the Clarendon Hill Busway as a really important transit usage. I'll now hand things over to Adam Polinsky to discuss some more specifics about this project.
Thanks, Greg, and good evening, everyone. So now that Greg has sort of given you the higher level overview and some of the context for sort of how we came to pick this corridor, I'll get into some of the details about what that actually could potentially include. So there are some things in this project that are definitely included. There are some things that could potentially be included, and there are some things that will not be included. Sorry, getting distracted by the cute baby. This is not a full capital reconstruction project in the sense that everything is on the table. We do a project like this once a year and we select a different portion of street, usually a bigger street like Broadway or Washington Street is a good example of recent streets that have fallen into this. And so we always like to make it really clear to folks that there are some things that are not on the table and there are some things that are very much up to discussion, and we will make decisions on based on what we hear from you all and the feedback that we get in terms of what's a priority. So the things that are definitely included as a baseline, the sidewalks will be reconstructed all the way up and down the corridor from Alewife Brook Parkway up to Clarendon Ave, and all the curb ramps in between where you cross the street will be reconstructed as well. So that will all be up to standard ADA compliance. You'll have nice flat sidewalks with no tripping hazards at the end of the project. All of the street will also be repaved between the curbs, so no more potholes, ruts, and utility trenches. That will all be paved at the end of the project. We'll also have new tree plantings. So we're going to be working with our arborists to figure out where we can plant new trees, ideally in as many places as possible. We don't know all the specifics yet, but we will be planting them. We will be improving crosswalks to the degree we can throughout the corridor and making them safer. As well as meeting that ADA compliance, the accessibility that I mentioned earlier. We will be having designated bike facilities per the bike network plan in at least one direction. And then because we will be including those bike facilities, that will also require changes to parking regulations. There are some things that could be on the table, like I said, based on feedback and sort of how we can fit things into the design and what might work where. Those are things like landscaping zones, greenery, whether it's more trees in a larger planted area or shrubbery or a green strip, traffic calming, for example, a raised crosswalk or a curb extension, one of those big pieces of sidewalk that sort of moves into the street or bumps out into the street to make it a little bit harder to turn, get people to turn more slowly. New crosswalks are very much on the table if there are locations that we feel a lot of people want to cross, but there's no crosswalk currently. Bus stop changes, either, potentially combining some bus stops into one because they're too close, spaced too closely together, or creating a larger waiting area and adding things like benches. We could potentially change the width of the sidewalks, likely not along the whole corridor, but in some places we can consider making the sidewalks a little bit wider, or changing the width of the travel lanes. Right now they're very wide, and so we do have a little bit of room to narrow the travel lanes to a more suitable standard Somerville width, and that will give us some opportunity to add some other things, which we'll get into a little bit later. We're still trying to figure out if there's opportunity to do some traffic signal control. And that would include, for example, upgrading the equipment at the Broadway and North intersection, which does fall within the project limits. So making sure that there's a countdown when you go to cross the street that says how much time you have left to cross, things like that. And then lastly, green stormwater infrastructure is also potentially on the table. Green stormwater infrastructure is anything on the sidewalk or in the furnishing zone that has the ability to take water and store it and help sort of contribute to our overall infrastructure, stormwater removal system. And that's things like bioswales and, specifically greenery that pitches in a certain direction, or if anyone's heard of a Silva cell, that kind of thing. And we just have to figure out what is actually possible, because there's a wide range of how much those things cost to construct and design. So it's something we're considering, but don't really have specifics yet on what that would include. There are also a couple of things that will not be included in this project. So we will not really be doing utility work underneath the street for this project, things like redoing the sewers. That is not part of this particular scope. It really is just a surface level project. We will not be adding any new street lighting as part of this project, and we will not be doing any network redesign, meaning that we will not be one-waying Broadway, for example, or changing how the side streets are sort of come into Broadway as one ways or two ways. That's outside of the scope of this project. I also want to talk through quickly with you guys the anticipated project timeline. So we are in the beginning of the project phase right now. So We have started our community outreach process in the sort of issue identification phase of the project, where we're just trying to figure out what's within the realm of possible, what our priorities are, and how we want to ultimately use that to inform a design for the street. And that process, the actual concept design, is going to take place starting in December. Will take a couple months, and then sometime around end of February, beginning of March, we'll be coming back to you all with an actual design for the street based on what we hear from you over the course of the next month or two, and getting feedback from everyone on a concept design. That process will take another couple months, and then we will use all that to inform a final design, which will take another 4 or 5 months to actually produce construction plans that can get built, at which point we're already going to be around November 2024. So we will go out to what we often go out to bids to hire a contractor to do the work for us. That's going to be another few months, alongside which we will be coming back to you all to kind of relay what the final design process, what the final designs look like, and make sure everyone's informed of what the construction timeline is going to look like. And then starting in spring 2025 is when our construction window begins. This is usually not the only thing included in these construction projects. We also do like some partial paving of certain smaller side streets alongside this, or reconstructing certain sidewalks in certain areas. There's a little bit of an amalgamation of various projects that we do. So construction may not start first thing in spring 2025, but we can say that it is expected to be completed by the end of 2026. So we're talking roughly 1 season's worth of construction sometime between spring 2025 and fall 2026. More details to come on that once we actually get closer to construction. We also want to make sure that everyone is aware, and that you all know that we're aware that there are other projects nearby. One, for example, that's happening right now is the redesign of the Powderhouse Boulevard at Alewife Brook Parkway intersection. That is not expected to overlap with this. This project our Broadway project that we're talking about now is not going to start construction until after Broadway is completed, so there will not be any impacts there. We do also know that the Somerville Housing Authority Clarendon Hill Apartments redevelopment is going to be getting underway. There may be some impacts to traffic there, and so if that is taking place at the same time as Broadway construction, we will be coordinating to minimize any traffic detouring impacts between the two projects. And with that, I will hand things over to Kate to talk a little bit about community feedback.
Thanks, Adam. So I just want to talk to folks about how does community feedback shape the design of the project. Community feedback will provide insight into transportation safety issues along West Broadway and in the nearby area. It will impact which traffic calming installations that we implement in the project, help us understand opportunities for new crossings or better crossings, more greenery and other street amenities, and identify frequently traveled routes to key destinations such as schools, nearby businesses, and parks, and really just help us overall how to make this project a better project. So I just want to go through some of the strategies we aim to use to connect to folks in this project. We really want to meet people where they are and create different types of opportunities, be part of the design development. So firstly, we aim to host 3 virtual community meetings that we kind of see as launching kind of each round of public engagement. So you're with us on our first one, where we're here to launch the process and hear feedback on design options. At our second meeting, which we anticipate for next spring, as you saw from that same timeline, we will share a proposed design and gather your feedback. At our third meeting, which we anticipate in late 2024, we will share the final design. And throughout the design development, we want to have these kind of touch points with our survey. And so right now we have our ongoing survey to hear your transportation safety concerns. What are some of your values or priorities for the future street design? And other comments or kind of inquiries about the area. After that second meeting, we'll host another survey, and that's where we really want to hear kind of your initial feedback on those proposed design. Throughout the project, we plan to flyer the street and nearby area about upcoming community meetings, surveys, and other community engagement opportunities, and also connect one-on-one with local businesses, community groups, faith and civic institutions, and advisory groups. And one of those First direct meetings, if you're a resident of Clarendon Towers, will actually be right at Clarendon Towers on November 9th in the community room of the Chatham Building at 6 p.m. And really just come and talk to us in person, share your concerns and ideas similar to what we're doing this evening. We also have other online opportunities to provide information. So if you're interested, we have an online public input map where you can add your comments directly to the map. So if you're like, I really want to say this specific crosswalk, you can put a marker on the map and add your comment. And then we'll also take this map in print during our street outreach and one-on-one meetings. We aim to do a range of what we call street outreach pop-ups. So you might be like going to get your coffee in the morning and you see me, Greg, and Adam on the street corner asking you like, hey, what do you want to do with the street? How do you want to fix it? So we'll have a series of those kind of throughout the months after our community or after our public meetings. And then we'll also continue to post updates through a variety of different communication channels. So if you follow any of the city's social media channels, if you want to sign up for, if you haven't already done so, the city or the mobility division newsletter will send updates. And as a registrant for this community meeting, you'll also get direct email updates from me just about upcoming engagement opportunities. And if it's easier for you to call, you can always use the city's 311 system that will log all your comments and calls, and we're going to pull that into all of the comments that we collect for this process. So again, we're just looking at a variety of different ways to connect with you and bring as many people into the process as possible. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Greg to talk a little bit about existing conditions on West Broadway.
Thank you, Kate. So yeah, as Kate just said, I'll now give an overview of some of the current conditions on the street and some of the issues that that we're already thinking about. So we know that the sidewalks are in poor condition in many places and are often not in compliance with accessibility standards. The photo on the left on this slide showing a brick area at one of the bus stops that has severe deterioration. The photo on the right is a location where tree roots have lifted a sidewalk panel, which creates a tripping hazard and an obstacle for people with mobility challenges. The roadway pavement has also deteriorated along the street, and this creates discomfort for people driving, biking, and using the bus. There are substandard crossing conditions in several locations along the street. The photo on the left shows the existing crosswalk at Russell Road and Farragut Ave, which doesn't have a curb ramp and is not an accessible crossing. And then the photo on the right shows that crossing between Clarendon Hill Towers and Stop and Shop, which we've identified as a location that has had some crashes and is in need of safety improvements. The other crossing shown in this photo is across the driveway to Clarendon Hill Towers, and this is a very long and an exposed crosswalk. There is very limited bicycle infrastructure currently on the street, including no bicycle markings on the roadway. Bicycle parking, so bicycle racks along the street are sporadic. There is one blue bike station at the western edge of the street, which you can see in the towards the back of this photo. But right now it's in a location where it needs to be removed in the winter for plowing, and certainly that's a resource we'd like to have a space to keep on Broadway, on this section of Broadway, for the entire year. The tree canopy along the street is very variable. There are some blocks that have large, beautiful trees, like in the photo on the left, and it's definitely something that we will preserve during this project. There are also other blocks, like on the right, that have no trees or greenery, and we will be looking for opportunities to add landscaping in those areas. We've already talked a bit about the MBTA busway at Clarendon Hill and how important that is for bus ridership. The condition of the busway is very poor, and it's a priority of ours to continue advocating for and supporting our MBTA partners to make improvements to this busway. So we know that West Broadway is not a one-size-fits-all street, and we have to think about the unique context of the street on each of its blocks. There are several blocks here that are primarily commercial and small businesses, and it's very important to us to work with the businesses to identify their transportation issues and look for opportunities to make the street work better for them. We've already begun connecting and talking to businesses on the street, and will continue to do this throughout the project. West Broadway is also a neighborhood street with many homes on the street itself, and it serves as an important connector for accessing the neighborhoods and homes that are adjacent to Broadway. Intersections can often be the most challenging and dangerous part of a street to navigate, and each intersection on West Broadway has its own unique issues, and we'll be looking at each of these to identify opportunities to make improvements. The top priority for improving safety at intersections, and we'll also look for opportunities where we can respond to traffic flow issues. For example, in this photo, we know that the left turn from Broadway onto Clarendon Ave is a very common movement, and that often there are challenges here when there's heavy congestion. So we will certainly be looking at this specific case. So now we would like to hear from you all about some of your experiences and your general thoughts about using or traveling along West Broadway.
Thanks, Greg. So folks, we have another kind of interactive poll if you're interested in participating. I've shared a link in the chat, but you can also use this QR code if you want to join on your phone, or go to menti.com and put in the code 32836062. And we just kind of want to hear, kind of poll all of us, like, what are some of the things about your general experience on West Broadway? So I'm going to give folks a moment to start to input some comments. Okay, so we're getting some comments come in, and just a reminder, it's totally optional. We just wanted to kind of hear after we've shared some of the things that we shared some of the things that we know about the street back with you. So I'm just seeing some come in, so I'm going to read them out loud so we can all see. So you've got potholes, a free-for-all, dangerous, nice businesses, bumpy, biking, see terror. So this is quite a changing moment as we have a lot of people participating. Some folks sharing, not inviting for walking, a comment about light timing, one comment sharing it's boring, hectic, terrifying, tight, scary, bus delay, running lights, stressful. So thank you as you're kind of inputting more and more comments. See some ones around speeds mostly slow, not enough parking, rough pavement, ugly hole in the middle of, I'm pretty sure that's at the crosswalk by the Stop and Shop, because it's the hole by the crossing. Let's see, did I miss any others? Too wide, door zone. Thank you all for participating. Again, this is just a way for us to just hear a little bit from you about some of the experiences on the street. I'll end with a couple more coming in, such as unattractive street, desolate looking, dooring hazards, poor driving, Stephen Conley, not inviting for walking. And I think I've got mostly all. If I missed any, what we'll do is include this in the presentation slides that we'll post to the website afterwards. But thank you all for participating and just sharing a little bit about your experience on the street.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And so now that we have talked through some of the issues and heard from you about some of your experiences, I'll share some of the options available to us to start thinking about how we can address these issues. The improvements to the pedestrian environment will definitely include new sidewalks and accessible curb ramps, as Adam shared earlier in the presentation. We'll also be looking for opportunities to provide new amenities such as benches and additional landscaping. In the photos on this slide, on the top photo and the bottom left show the recently completed project on College Ave, which, as you can see, has new sidewalks and accessible curb ramps, as well as new benches and landscaping in the bottom right photo, which was part of a recent reconstruction on Somerville Ave. We will have the opportunity to evaluate crossings and make changes to make them safer. Some of the tools that are available to us to make crossing improvements are raised crossings, which help increase the visibility of the crosswalk, help slow down vehicles as they're approaching the crossing, and enable people using wheelchairs and other mobility devices to cross more easily. Curb extensions or curb bump outs can be used to shorten the distance from one side of the street to the other. And this helps to make it easier for people driving and crossing to see each other, also by preventing vehicles from parking too close to the crossing. And they also can help slow vehicle speeds by narrowing the roadway. A crossing island or a refuge island provides a safe place to pause while crossing multiple lanes, and can also reduce vehicle speeds by narrowing the roadway and preventing people who are driving from taking fast and shallow turns. So the top photo is a recently completed project on Holland Street, and this is showing a raised crossing in combination with curb bump outs. And the bottom photo on College Ave is showing a crossing island. Protected bicycle lanes have separation and physical barriers between people using the bike lane and parked or moving cars. The photos here show a few examples of what protected bike lanes can look like and the different types of barriers that we can consider as part of this project. It's worth noting that adding a protected bike lane does not necessarily mean that all of the street parking will be removed. Often the parking can be preserved by relocating it outside of the protected bike lane. And you can see this in the top right picture, which is a recently restriped project on Grand Union Boulevard. When installing protected bike lanes, often we look for opportunities to preserve street parking and loading, and this is especially near priority locations like businesses. As discussed, West Broadway is an important bus corridor with high bus ridership. We will be looking for opportunities to improve bus stop amenities for riders, as well as making changes that improve bus operations and reliability. Some of the tools that can help us do this include floating bus stops, which bump out the sidewalk to provide additional dedicated space for people to wait for the bus. This also allows the bus to stop in the travel lane, which can help reduce delay and removes conflicts between the bus and people biking and driving, so the bus does not have to pull in and out of the bus stop as they would otherwise. Bus lanes and bus queue jumps can also allow the bus to bypass traffic delays, and these are the lanes in the street that are often painted red and are for buses or bikes only. And when these are placed strategically, they can significantly reduce bus delay. Shelters and benches also enhance the comfort of people waiting for the bus, and shelters provide protection from bad weather. I'll now hand it over to Adam to talk about some of the street design options that we have that include some of these possibilities.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, so let's get into some of how what Greg was just describing might actually look on the street. Here we have the existing conditions on West Broadway. It is currently about 10-foot sidewalks on both sides of the street. That may vary a little bit at different points along the corridor. And then you have between 40 and 43 feet between the curbs of actual paved section of street. For the most part, it's 43. And so the examples we're going to run through next have use a 43-foot cross section between the two curbs, what we call curb to curb. But just keep in mind that it does pinch down a little bit, which does change some of our our options. So yeah, we just want to run through with you all what the street could look like if we prioritize different things. There are a couple things that are definitives in this plan at this point, so we will not be one-waying this section of Broadway. It's going to continue to function as a two-way street, which means we have to have a travel lane in each direction. Those are about 11 feet each, so that will be sort of part of our baseline design here. We also do not plan on narrowing the sidewalks, so the sidewalk space will stay in there as well. So that leaves us about 18 to 21 feet of flex space after you account for those items. In implementing our recently approved bike network plan as well. That's been approved by the city council. It is also showing a bike lane in at least one direction for the full length of this corridor. So we are considering that part of the baseline as well. So that accounts for another 7 to 8 feet of the cross section, leaving between 10 and 14, again, depending on the section of the street you're at, for truly flexible space that we can discuss what the best option is and that we want to hear from you all on in terms of what the highest priorities are. So as we work through these, if we asked ourselves, what would the street look like if we prioritized using that additional flex space for on-street parking and bike mobility, what would it look like? Here is one example. So you could provide a second bike lane. So you have one protected bike lane in each direction of the street. And then you could also provide a parking lane in addition to the two travel lanes. So you'd have the sidewalks, you'd have, you know, you can see a bike lane on the left, a parking lane next to it, the two travel lanes, and then a bike lane on the right, followed by the sidewalk. Oh, I didn't notice the subtlety there for a second. This is a slight variation on that. One thing that we've also done in certain plans is to actually raise the bike lane up to sidewalk level. As I described earlier, this is not, there's a set amount of funding available for a project like this. And so in some cases, you do want to raise the bike lane to sidewalk level if you can. And if we can make it work from a funding perspective and it makes sense from a design perspective, you could potentially raise the bike lane on one side of the street. So that's what's shown on the right side of the screen here. And then the one on the left is shown at what we call street level. Another option, if we want to, again, you know, let's say we're prioritizing bike mobility and continuing to show bike lanes in both directions, but instead of on-street parking, our other priority was bus mobility, which, you know, for example, at a bus stop, that would be something that would make a lot of sense. You could do something shown here. So instead of using that roughly 7 feet that we had for on-street parking in one of the previous slides, you could put essentially a 9-foot wide concrete pad. Greg had gone over what that looks like. We call it a floating bus stop in one of the previous slides. And you could put that at a bus stop and give people additional space off of the sidewalk to wait for the bus. You could put a shelter there or a bench. And you could also, one of the benefits of these is that it separates bikes from buses as well. So a bike can kind of tuck behind this area, and then a bus would stop in the travel lane and pick people up, and then they don't have to, there's no conflict, they don't have to interact at all. Everyone can be on their merry way. Another option, if we want to really focus on prioritizing bus mobility, in particular at intersections where we know that there's a lot of congestion and buses get caught in traffic and it really slows everyone down if you're on the bus, would be to consider a combined bus bike lane. We see these a lot at busy intersections in Somerville, and that would take up almost that full flex space that we're talking about here, that you know 10 to 14 feet. We would incorporate this, like I said, likely at a busier intersection, maybe at North Street, potentially, and this would give buses the ability to kind of maneuver out of traffic and go up to the intersection and through, and that space would have to be shared. Bikes would have to share that space with buses, and that would you know, we would not be able to prioritize any other additional things like parking, which we've already seen, or anything like widening the sidewalks. if, for example, we wanted to go and pivot in a different direction and for a portion or a length of the street, focus on providing on-street parking and more landscaping, for example, it could look something like this. So you have parking on one side of the street, you have the 2 travel lanes, and then instead of that bus stop that we had shown earlier, say you're not at a bus stop and you want to do something else different on that side of the street, you could still provide that bike lane there and keep the sidewalks the way they are, but you could have a 9-foot landscaping zone, which is pretty wide and could potentially be pretty nice. Maybe you could put a second row of trees there. Maybe it's shrubbery, some of that green stormwater infrastructure we're talking about, like a bioswale. There are a few different options, but that is one way that we could potentially designate space on the corridor, either for a very small stretch. So it could just be 20 or 40 feet or a block, or for longer sections of the corridor. That's kind of the nice thing here, is that depending on what we hear from everyone, these are things that can be done for a very short stretch or for very long stretches. And obviously some of these things make sense to do for longer stretches, like bike lanes. Obviously only doing them for a block doesn't tend to be as valuable as when you have long runs. But a nice landscaping zone, even if it's only for a short stretch or for a block, could provide a lot of value on the street. And so we can mix and match a lot of these. One more example I'll give to everyone here is what if we opted to, let's say, again, focus on having bike lanes in both directions, but widening the sidewalks instead of having a wider landscaping zone. It could look something like this. So we need to be really careful about where trees are currently located. We don't want to be clear cutting trees on the sidewalk. And so in the example here, you can see on the left side that we kind of keep the trees roughly where they're located on the corridor, but you could actually provide a sidewalk on the other side of the trees. Again, this is something, it could just be a little area around a tree where we have a really big tree and it's kind of lifting up the sidewalk, and it's going to be really difficult for us to get it to truly compliant grades so that it's nice and flat. But we could actually put the, we could build an alternate route around the tree on the other side. You could, again, do that for just the length of the tree. You could do it for a larger section of street and really provide additional space for pedestrians to walk if we so choose. And then a little bit of a different take on that is to, instead of having two walking paths, essentially you could use some of that space for a sitting zone. So we have parklets in Somerville. A lot of these are on the street right now, but we could put those up. We could build out some concrete, put those up on sidewalk level, maybe put a little bit of a landscaping zone and give space, whether it's outside of a business or maybe it's on, near a bus stop, someplace where people want to congregate a little bit. We could consider an option like this. And so this is just a little bit of a different take on how we could potentially, use extra space for sitting and for pedestrians if we wanted to narrow the street. All right, so just to wrap things up and to reiterate, we do have a little bit of a variable width of the corridor along here. So we were just going through what we could do on the widest sections of the street. It does pinch down a little bit. And so it just means that for the 1 or 2 blocks where we do have narrower than 43 feet, we just have a little bit of that little bit less of that flex space to do different things. And so that's just something that we're gonna have to keep in mind as we go throughout the process. So all that to say, as much as we want to incorporate everything and prioritize all of these different things along the corridor, we do have to make some decisions, and that is what we want to take to you all to really understand, like, what are the biggest issues, what are the things that we really want to focus on incorporating into this design, and do these different cross sections that we've just gone through kind of inspire anyone or give anyone ideas as to what could make the most sense and what they want the future of Broadway to look like.
So folks, I got one more poll for you this evening. It's on that same link. So if you have that same pop-up or web browser up on your screen, but you can use that same QR code or use the link in the chat, which I'll provide again. But you can go to menti.com/3 and enter the code 3283-6062. We just wanted to see, just kind of poll again, what are some things that you're looking for on the street? So I'm going to share that code in the chat and share my screen, and we can start to see what some folks are putting in. So again, totally optional and just take your time. And we've got some of the similar questions on this survey, but giving folks a moment to submit their answers. We're seeing some stuff come in. So you got about 14 people participating. We're at a total of 47 attendees this evening. So we'll give folks a moment to complete, and I'll start to read through some of the items coming through. As you'll see too, the words that get bigger means they've been inputted multiple times. And that's why you'll see this changing sizes of the words. So maybe I'll start to read some through from the kind of center out. Seen some folks write protected bike lanes, parking, bike lanes, green, traffic calming, trees, safer crossings, safer biking, landscaping, shade trees, dining, safe crosswalks, cafe green space, left turn lane for Clarendon, continuous sidewalks, bike and bus priority, grade separated bike lane, consider old people, preserve business access, bus improvements, more pleasant walking, safety for pedestrians, green areas, trees and plants, efficient buses, fire station, clear traffic signals, parking where needed, smooth pavement, connection with Arlington. So I think I've read most of those out. Oh, had some more come in, beautification, parklet cafe, on-street parking. But thank you for those who've inputted your items into the word cloud. And again, this will be part of the presentation slides when we post them to the website. So I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back to Greg to share our last couple of slides. Wonderful. So I'm just going to share a little bit about what comes next before we dive into discussion. As we mentioned, we have a survey out now that we'd love for folks to take. It's available on the project website at somervillema.gov/West Broadway. And again, we'll send a direct link in our follow-up email to all those who registered for the meeting this evening. You can stay up to date by subscribing to the Mobility Monthly newsletter for project updates. And you can always share your ideas with us directly by email at transportation@somervillema.gov or call us at 311 with the full number of 617-666-3311. So I'm just going to go through a couple of discussion instructions. As we mentioned at the top, we're having questions come in through the chat. So we're going to prioritize the questions coming in. But if we don't read your comment out loud, no worries. We've keeping those all together in a log. And we're actually going to share a summary of all the comments we got at the end of kind of this round of feedback, and we'll post on the website. If you prefer to not write your question but want to share it out loud, you can, we'll have spoken questions and comments about like 20 minutes into discussion, and we'll answer questions or have folks raise your hand. So if you can press the raise hand button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, or if you're joining by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. I'll go on the list of folks who kind of raise their hand, or like in the order of those who have raised their hands, and I'll kind of give you a cue about the next 3 people up in the total amount of people who are in line, so you kind of have an idea of where you might be. And as a reminder, we're just going to close this meeting at 8, so we got plenty of time for discussion. At any point you have technical difficulties, we'll keep this up, but you can always email us at transportation@, or call 781-808-8272. So I'll keep those instructions up and refer to them a couple times through. We're at 6:55 now, so probably at like 7:15, we'll move into spoken comments and questions. But I'll just start with some of the questions that have come in. So our first one is actually outside the project scope, but maybe Adam, you could help answer this. Elizabeth asks, when you say West Broadway, does this, or why doesn't it include Broadway starting at Powder House and extending to Teal Square? Conditions on the stretch are very unsafe. And then when will this segment be redone?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So this is something that I think has come up in a couple times in the chat already, and we did give this a lot of thought. So long story short, this entire section of Broadway is definitely in need of repaving. Everything all the way up to the Ball Square Bridge actually is on our 5-year plan currently. And so we only have funding to tackle essentially it in chunks. So the Alewife Brook Parkway to Teal Square section is one chunk. The Teal Square to Powder House Circle section is another chunk, and then Powder House Circle to Ball Square is the third chunk. And so we had to make a call between which of those three we would tackle first, and that's what we were able to incorporate into this street project. And Greg went through some of that early in the presentation, but just given the state of the street, given some of the connections to some of our vulnerable populations, like over at Clarendon Hill, the Veterans Center, and with some of the small businesses out there, we wanted to make sure that we were coming at this from an equity perspective, and that we were going to tackle the section of street that we felt needed the most. And so we're here today talking about the westernmost section of Broadway. We haven't made any decisions yet as to exactly when the other two sections get completed, but they are definitely conversations that we're having. And they are sort of on the short list for the 5-year plan for repaving. So nothing we can commit to right now, but the only decision we've made is for this section. We felt like this was the most important of those three.
Thanks, Adam. So we have two questions that I'm going to put together around crash data. So Greg, when you called out the crash data in kind of the early slides, did any of these crashes, or these crashes did not include Route 16 and Broadway, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, that intersection is outside of the limit of this specific project. There is a separate process that is beginning that will look at the intersection of Broadway and Route 16. But for this specific West Broadway reconstruction project, the limits are just east of that intersection to Clarendon Ave. So the data that was shown there doesn't include the Route 16 intersection.
And then kind of continuing along the crash data, I think there was just a clarifying information. We specifically called out where the pedestrian and bicyclist crashes had occurred. But those are not the only locations that crashes occurred along this segment, correct?
Correct. Yeah, there were throughout this section of Broadway crashes. The other 26 crashes that involved only motor vehicles were spread throughout this stretch. So yeah, those locations were just where crashes involved people walking, rolling, or biking, which we often refer to as like our vulnerable street users. But there were, other crashes.
Yeah, and so just because crashes only occurred I think the commentator had just asked, like, why would you not focus on just where those crashes occurred and instead the whole stretch?
So even though those locations are where crashes have occurred up to this point, and we've identified them as hotspots in certain areas that need to be addressed, we've also identified, this entire corridor in need of safety improvements. And just because crashes haven't happened in other locations with people walking and rolling and biking, doesn't mean that if we don't address safety issues now, that couldn't happen in the future.
Thanks, Greg. So one question came in from Melissa that says, have you done actual focus groups specifically with disabled and elderly people to get their input regarding the proposed changes and whether they meet those people's needs? So maybe, Greg, I could take that question. So as Greg mentioned, right now we don't have any developed designs for Broadway specifically. That's where we're really looking to gather that input now. And connecting with folks who identify as being disabled or older adult is a critical component of this project. But throughout all of our projects, we actually meet regularly with the Commission for Persons with Disabilities that advises the City of Somerville on a variety of things from transportation redesign projects to zoning variances. And we actually do host specific focus groups with folks who identify as older adults in collaboration with Council on Aging, as well as our Somerville Office of Immigrant Affairs, or SOIA, as you might know. So it's really, we feel like it's a critical component of our work to connect with folks of all different ages, of all different abilities, to understand their needs. Everything from specific needs at a crosswalk to how the sidewalk should look and how you travel around the city. So my next question, oh, we have another question from Melissa specifically about the Stop and Shop parking lot. Could we talk to Stop and Shop and ask them to beautify the parking lot?
So that is private property with Stop and Shop, so it's not within our abilities to make any changes to their parking lot. But we can, certainly keep that context in mind as this project progresses.
Cool, thanks, Greg. So our next question is about sidewalks. Erd asked about the possibility of continuous sidewalks, where the sidewalks paralleling Broadway remain at a continuous level at smaller intersections, and the turning vehicle traffic goes over a hump to cross the sidewalk. Just wondering if we could employ even stronger visual language to define these crossings as a pedestrian priority. So Greg, do you want to talk about some of our options, not just across Broadway, but on those crosswalks along Broadway?
Sure. Yeah, so the example that we shared with the raised crossings and what we've done on Holland Street, those can be considered on Broadway itself, but also looked at across the side streets, which I think is what the question was asking. So in those cases, vehicles that are turning onto Broadway or off of Broadway would have to slow down as they're approaching that crossing, and I think to go over the raised crossing. Is that so those are definitely things that we can look at as part of this project. Is that the question?
I think it was, Greg, and I will just add that a lot of those raised side street crossings are often the drainage matters, right? So in some cases, the way that you build those can actually make drainage a lot easier. And in some cases, it makes it a lot harder and thus increases the cost of the project significantly. So what we typically do is we want to incorporate as many elements like that along the side streets as possible. We definitely prioritize making the crosswalks across the main line as safe as possible, because that's where people feel the most uncomfortable. We often see the most crashes. And then when it comes to the side streets, if it actually improves the drainage, it is much more, it's much more realistic to incorporate those where it is going to improve that situation. If suddenly we're looking at adding a bunch of new places where we need to get the water to drain to make it happen, we have to start getting more strategic about whether or not that's possible and if it's within the scope of the project. So we try to do that in as many places as we can, but we do have to be realistic about like the drainage does matter, and so we can't put them everywhere typically.
Thanks, Adam and Greg. So I've got two questions around quick build. And if folks aren't familiar with the term quick build, this is where the city can employ things instead of reconstructing the sidewalk. They might use stuff like kind of like movable planters or paint to kind of change the configuration of the street. So we have two quick build questions. Era asks, what are the options to connect the quick build traffic safety improvements on Holland Street to the project through Teal Square so the intersection does not continue to be a high crash intersection? And then I'll ask the following one after.
Adam, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat it one more time, Kate?
Yeah, so what are the options to connect the quick build traffic safety improvements on Holland Street to this project through Teal Square so that the intersection does not continue to be a high crash intersection?
Yeah, so Teal Square is something that's definitely on our minds. However, that is going to be a project all on its own. It's going to be a little bit of a bear, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's really important, but it's going to require a lot of design and a lot of consideration, particularly with things like the fire station that is right there and how that interacts. Exactly this question about how we connect the various facilities that we just built on Holland up through that section of street. And it was just not going to be realistic given the timeline and funding stream that we have right now to incorporate Teal into that project schedule. So we will likely be taking the Teal section and then everything east of that section of Broadway that some folks have also been asking about tonight, and figuring out when we can tackle those. But unfortunately, we just don't have the ability to do that at this point in time.
And our second quick build question today is, could a quick build implementation possibly, or is a quick build implementation possible sooner than 2025 when the construction is mainly scheduled?
So on West Broadway, we don't currently have a quick build project in planning at this point, but that doesn't rule out the possibility for quick build improvements before the reconstruction project. So quick build projects are something we're really always looking for the opportunity to implement all over the city. And if we have the opportunity to do one here, then we'll certainly look into that.
Thanks. So some of our next are around potential bike facilities. Zach asks, since Broadway's usage a bit more arterial, have we considered a two-way separated bike path along one side sidewalk rather than trying to integrate basic flex post bike lanes like on a less major roads?
Do you want to go ahead, Adam?
I can take that one, and you can fill in anything that I missed, Greg. But yes, two-way bike facilities are generally something we could think about on a project like this. Those often work the best, and they do save you a little space, which is great. You know, we have tiny streets, and we're always looking for ways to cram as much into the cross section as possible while still making safe facilities. However, on a corridor like Broadway, where you have destinations on both sides of the street, and in particular, you have bus routes and bus stops on both sides of the streets, it makes it really tricky to incorporate figure out how you're going to make that two-way facility work and essentially have a bus that's required to stop in that two-way facility. We just don't have the room to make that work on both sides of the street, and it provides a really tricky design challenge from that perspective. And then how you cross people at major intersections in particular, or even at side streets, becomes a lot more complicated. So what we've found is that in certain contexts, a two-way bike lane can work and is sometimes worth serious consideration. But on a street like this, particularly with the bus interaction, it makes it more challenging. And so we'd likely pursue, if we were to pursue bike lanes in both directions, they would likely be on separate sides of the street.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this, Adam, but we also have businesses on both sides of the street on this section of West Broadway. So even though it is used as a commuting corridor, there are destinations on West Broadway itself that we don't want to limit people from accessing and getting to side streets too. When you have a two-way bike lane on one side, it can be challenging to get to side streets on the other side of the street.
So speaking of buses, we have a question around any consideration to an AM peak hour bus bike lane in the eastbound direction with parking available at other times for the businesses.
Yes, yeah, that's something that we can definitely consider here. So we're still considering all options, and time designated usage of space is yeah, something that we can definitely look into.
I will just add some context there, that is something that we had proposed on Holland in college a few years back. And when we had proposed sort of those peak hour facilities to the community, we heard that maybe shorter but 24/7 facilities were preferred. So doesn't mean it's something that's not on the table. It definitely is, but we also got that feedback from residents of this neighborhood that they often, they thought it would be cleaner, easier to understand, and better for everyone involved for the 24/7 facilities. Doesn't mean that couldn't change, but that was definitely something that we had heard from Ward 6 and 7 residents in those processes.
Going along with some of the additional parking question, we had another question around, in the parts where street parking will remain, can you remove the meters and make them permit only, or at least permit only on street sweeping days? Maybe I could jump on this one first. When it comes to parking regulations, we're really interested in first kind of understanding a lot of the needs of the street. So we do prioritize using regulations like meters near some of our businesses, as it allows for kind of like a more turnover of customers. One thing we've also employed are sometimes what we call our quick spots. So you might see some of our loading zone signage across the city. We're beginning to kind of change that up a little bit to show visuals that it could be used for commercial loading, such as if you're unloading a truck to take products into a business. But also if you want to, run in quickly and pick up your takeout, you can use that spot for 5 minutes. So those are some of the things that we're looking for on some of our needs, with Broadway hosting lots of businesses and being such a central corridor. Doing things where if we really then look at like, okay, what is the amount of other parking left? And so we know there's also residential needs, but I think having a specific regulation like permit only on street sweeping day, especially because street sweeping is primarily for like just a chunk of that day, can be quite difficult. So, I mean, it's definitely interesting input to gather, and we appreciate it. And we will be looking at kind of parking data in the area, such as like how often is it used? Where do people park nearby? So really, I mean, team, if there's any addition to add, but with parking regulations, we're really looking to tease that out throughout the whole design development. It's actually something that we often can, all the way up until construction, kind of learn more about and see how we can tweak and adjust even later after construction.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say I think this is a good opportunity to highlight the fact that this is a multidisciplinary, multi-departmental process. So you're mostly talking to the mobility and engineering folks right now that are kind of guiding that design and construction. But we need to be in contact with the parking department, who does installation of all the parking signs in the city and enforces those and writes tickets and has hearings for the said tickets and sends you all your permits, as well as our DPW, who does all the maintenance and street sweeping and plowing throughout the city. The fire department is someone we work with regularly to make sure that our designs are going to work for them. And so we're open to kind of considering everything on the table, but all of those things do need to work with our operations partners as well. And so there are sometimes just hard realities about what is or isn't possible in terms of what we could actually accommodate, what is realistic to maintain or to enforce with any given new idea. So this is the place and the time for us to consider those things, but it does kind of run through the full city process and through multiple departments to figure out what can and can't be done. And we want to try new ideas, but sometimes those things also need to be run by what can actually can happen on the ground.
So folks, as we approach 7:15, we still have quite a few chat questions and only one hand raised currently. So if you're interested in making a spoken question or comment, feel free to start to raise your hands as we continue to answer a few more questions in chat. And then if we have some more time at the end, we can always jump back to some of those questions in the chat. And if we don't answer your questions this evening, we'll definitely aim to kind of pull those together and actually answer them in the next meeting, just to kind of make sure we don't have any unanswered questions in this process. So I have a couple questions that are a little bit outside the scope, if Greg and Adam, if you wouldn't mind answering. We have one question from Meredith about traffic calming on side streets. Meredith described, we live on Victoria Street with 2 young kids, and the entrance to Broadway is very scary with people leaving and entering the gas station. Will this be addressed? And my apologies, the traffic calming on Victoria could be slightly out of scope, but that specific intersection you're describing is directly in scope. So Greg and Adam, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, I can answer first, and Adam, feel free to fill in. So yeah, we'll be looking at every intersection on the corridor, and each intersection is really unique. So there, as you pointed out, are specific things we need to think about at the intersection with Victoria Street, and certainly a land use like a garage station will have a lot of cars going in and out of it. So when we're looking at that location, we'll think about what are the vehicle movements going to be, and what can we do to reduce conflicts between people driving and people walking or rolling or biking.
Yeah, and I'll just add that unfortunately we can't control the number of people leaving or entering the gas station, and we likely won't be able to change that driveway access as part of this project. However, what we can do is at least make them go slower, so that is a safer movement in terms of people not being able to speed in and out of there. And so that's, to Greg's point, that's something we will definitely be looking at for each of these side streets along the corridor and figuring out how we can make that as safe as possible.
Hey, Adam, can I add a complexity to that particular intersection? I've heard
Yeah.
a lot about it from constituents. It's also that Victoria's one way down off of Broadway. And so there's a driveway out of the gas station onto Victoria, but cars don't see the one way sign or they ignore it. And so they go the wrong way up the one way to Broadway. And then people are trying to get onto Victoria from Broadway. It's really a mess. I've requested better signage. I've requested additional signage, but there's it's a complex intersection because once you're done getting gas, if you can't get out onto Broadway, you don't necessarily know or see or care as a car, as a driver, that Victoria is one way.
Great. That's really helpful context, and those are the kinds of things that will like help inform what ultimately is the right design for you know, a side street like that or that intersection. So thank you.
So maybe I'll pause there with chat questions, but maybe we'll come back to them as we still have quite a few left. But I want to respect those who've been waiting patiently with their hands raised. So again, if you are interested in providing a spoken question or comment, please either press the raise hand button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, or if you're joining by phone, press *9. We currently have 2 people in line versus Vincent Beaudoin and then Era Scher. And so Vincent, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Era after. Vincent, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Vince. I live just over the border in Arlington, along Broadway, a couple blocks into Arlington. Thank you for holding this. I was very glad to hear that the Route 16 intersection is being considered, even though it's part of a separate project. And I would just also encourage you to include the town of Arlington in those conversations. You know, reach out to our transportation planner. I also am the founder of a fairly new group called the Broadway Neighbors Coalition, which we're getting together to talk about street safety along Broadway in Arlington, both along Broadway and the side streets. But, you know, I would also welcome folks from Somerville who are interested in talking about these conversations, because we're really facing exactly the same issues. So if you'd like to reach out to us, just look for Broadway Neighbors Coalition on Facebook. And again, thank you for holding this. Look forward to Somerville and Arlington working together on all of these issues.
Thank you, Vince. Yeah, we certainly will be coordinating with Arlington as part of the Route 16 intersection project, and coordinating with any projects that are happening in Arlington on Broadway approaching Somerville. So Arlington is a very important neighboring partner to us, and yeah, we look forward to continued collaboration with the town and with advocates as well. And I believe your organization had sent us some of the plans that you all have been working on, so thank you for that. And yeah, looking forward to continuing to work with you all.
Thank you.
So next we have Era, followed by Phil, and currently that's all who have raised their hands so far. So Era, you should be able to unmute now.
Thanks, Kate. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to the Mobility Division and Councilor Pineda Neufeld for holding this. This is great. I wanted to follow up on Adam's point about the reliance on other departments to enforce the designs that you're talking about tonight. I think we all know that enforcement often comes with bias and maybe isn't the best way to make streets work for everyone. So I'm wondering how you are thinking about this project and design, and particularly the selection of new design types, new materials, to minimize the reliance on those other departments to enforce. For example, the concrete curb separators that you showed from Cambridge. Thank you.
I can take that one. Thanks for the good question, Era. I think, largely where we're going these days, to your point about enforcement biases and just the manpower required to do any level of enforcement, is for the street to sort of enforce itself to the degree we can, and to really discourage people, particularly in cars, who often have the most sort of consequential actions, or the greatest consequences for their behavior. How can we sort of make sure that they're obeying the facilities that we're building, regardless of what it is? And so whether that is a raised bike lane, or concrete separated bike lanes, we're continually trying to find ways to increase the amount of, or the permanence and the level of protection that our facilities offer for cyclists, when it's for protected bike lanes. And so that sort of does, to the degree we can, mean we're going to be building raised facilities, or having some kind of concrete separation between them, or for a floating bus stop, for example, putting in bollards so that it's not possible for someone to drive onto that device, or that sort of waiting area for a bus stop. And then for pedestrians, where we do need crossings, we really focus on raised crossings so that people are going as slow as possible, and we don't need to rely on hoping that people drive the speed limit, that they're actually forced to do so throughout the entire length of the corridor, because we've implemented so much traffic calming. And when someone does make a mistake, that it's not a life or death situation. And so those are some of the ways that we're continually trying to figure out how we can really build a design that reinforces itself, versus require, leaning on enforcement to make, hope that these things happen.
Yeah, and if I could just add to, in kind of other ways as well, like Adam mentioned raised crosswalks to make it safer for folks walking and rolling, but we're also looking at ways that we can add what we call curb extensions or bump outs, especially in areas where it can prevent cars from parking too close to the crosswalk, decreasing visibility both for people driving to see other people coming, as well as seeing people using the crosswalk. And we were actually able to use it sometimes, again, subject to drainage, but building out the sidewalk with concrete to kind of prevent that parking, which is not legally allowed within 20 feet of a crosswalk. Really just kind of making that using concrete to concretely, enforce that regulation, and make it safer for folks crossing this street. One thing too that the city is continually trying to explore is not only, these very substantial ways with construction, but how do we kind of use other placemaking tools or things that make it kind of more fun, inviting, and for people to really indicate, like, slow down, pay attention. This is you're entering a residential street. Greg mentioned that Broadway will connect to future neighborways in the bicycle network plan. So really trying to think through all of that as we look to redesign the street. So next we have Phil Goff, and then that's our only hand raised at this time. So folks, if you want to raise your hand or ask your questions or comments, please raise your hand. If not, I'll go back to a couple chat questions before we close this evening. Phil, you should be unmuted now.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. Phil Goff, like Vince, I live just over the border too in Arlington, and I am part of the Broadway Neighbors Coalition. So sorry for the pile-on from people outside of Somerville, but I appreciate you taking my question. Most of the cross-section graphics that were shown showed, what the possibilities were in the 43-foot wide section of Broadway. But, verbally, and there was text that showed 40 to 43 feet. That 3 feet can make a big difference. The difference between, whether a bike lane can fit or not, whether it's separated bike lane, whether parking could possibly fit on one side. Can you talk a little bit about, I have two questions. Can you talk a little bit about where is the roadway 40 versus 43 or anything in between, if that's not getting too in the weeds? And then the second question, which I did put in the chat, but you didn't get to it, so I'll ask it here. Are standard 5 to 6 foot bike lanes in each direction an option? I don't recall seeing them, but that might be certainly a preference to a separated bike lane in one direction only, in my opinion, at least. Thanks.
So the first question about where the road narrows, so the widest sections of the street are in the westernmost and easternmost portions, and then the narrowest is in the middle, really between North Street and Farragut is where it starts to narrow down from 43 to 40 feet. And in the middle there, I think kind of between Garrison and Barton is really our tightest pinch point. And the second question, which I think was about, could what we call a basic bike lane, which is a bike lane without protection next to either a curb or a parked car, be considered in those sections or in other sections. So per the bicycle network plan, we will definitely have at least one direction of protected bike lane. With the other space, we can consider all different options for bike facilities. We don't consider those basic bike lanes to be all ages and abilities facilities, meaning that it's not a type of bike infrastructure that we feel that everyone would be comfortable using. So when we can provide protected lanes, that really is the priority. But it's certainly something that we'll look at what the options are as part of the design process.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'd also add, Greg, that we do have a couple of 40-foot cross sections where Holland Street is a good example where we only have 40 feet and we have managed to fit protected bike lanes in both directions and maintain parking on one side. It's not an ideal case, particularly for buses. It can get a little bit tight. It's been working out all right for the MBTA, but it's definitely a little bit tight. So I think it could end up being a moot point. If we were to go in that direction, we might be able to fit that particular cross section in there if we really needed to.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, so we have two more hands raised. Next, we have Eric Krupka, followed by Sean Kreitz. And sorry, Sean, if I didn't just share your name or last name correctly. So, Eric, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi. This was touched on a little bit earlier, but I'll ask it anyway. Does this planning exercise include ways to have traffic and parking laws enforced on West Broadway? The changes made over the past 2 years or so to Broadway at Powderhouse are certainly not being enforced, which makes those changes much less valuable than envisioned. And the expense put into them kind of wasted.
Eric, are there any laws in particular that you're alluding to?
The people who are parking in bike lanes, illegal rights from Broadway on to College, things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so yeah, did mention that we'd allude to this earlier. Obviously, to the degree we can, we try to have these things sort of self-enforcing and actually building a different version of a street that will make these things impossible, or very difficult at least. So Powder House was a quick build project. I think we would come back at some point and truly put like those bike lanes, for example, and those crosswalks, we would raise them, because that's kind of ultimately where we see these designs going, to not rely on enforcement as much. So it's sort of outside, like we do have regular conversations with SPD and with parking. It would definitely be outside of this particular project that we would have these conversations, but could end up influencing this project. But it does get to a much bigger question just about enforcement in the city in general. And I don't anticipate that this changing that fundamentally right now, but it is an evolving conversation that we're having as a city, and the best way to approach those things while we work towards that better infrastructure.
Thank you. I'm glad you're having that conversation.
My apologies. Thanks, Eric. Next we have Sean, and that's our only other hand raised at this time. Sean, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello, Kate. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Kate. And thank you for saying my last name correctly. Nobody ever does that.
Thanks.
My name is Sean Kreitz. I've lived at 162 Sycamore for a lot of years. We live on the other side of Broadway, not West Broadway. I think we were one of the first quick build bus bike lanes over this way. And I just have a few comments. Just your data alone, between 2018 and 2023, just looking at the slides, there was one bike accident. Not that any bike accident is okay. I do believe that's a relatively small number. So living with one of the first quick build bus lane bike lanes over here, there's been pros and cons, I believe. Some of the pros, obviously the bikes can drive right in the next lane of traffic. One of the cons has been there's been an unbelievable amount of traffic and just people pretty much idling all the time. And I know that, like, I'm kind of a green person. I think I was looking at one of your slides. I think it was the fourth option. There was one for a bike lane on the right side, and then there was a green space on the other one. I'm really a huge fan of that, just personally as a resident here. I love that idea. I feel like we don't have enough green space. I know we're a very densely packed urban city, but especially with all the development going on, with all of the buildings and density, I think any kind of landscape design or more trees is just really important to the infrastructure. As far as bike lanes go, one on one side, I think there's a balance. Taking away parking on both sides of a street, I think it's really tricky. I think access, it's not a big VA. I'm a veteran myself, but just to be able to access small business, I'm a small business owner myself, and I've seen it happen on Broadway, and I've seen businesses leave because 2 or 3% or 5% can mean the difference between a small business surviving or not surviving. And I've seen it on Broadway that when you cut off one side of parking, just even one side of the street of parking, elderly people, handicapped, it's not that they don't want to visit the business, they just can't. I just think I see the need for bike lanes. I see the need for green space. I just think if you're going to do it, hopefully we just keep everyone in consideration, including the handicap and the elderly. I've heard many stories about people in my neighborhood that they're almost shut-ins sometimes because there's no parking anywhere or nowhere to park, to go to the regular businesses. And then I just am scared of the way Davis Square and a lot of places are going, that there'll be nowhere to park and it'll just be big corporate chains, and we'll lose a lot of like the local business owners in Somerville. And thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, for the comment. I will, if I miss anything that you had asked, let me know. I think that your first comment was about increased congestion. So Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a major difference between that section of Broadway and this project, we will not be making any reductions in the number. So there are currently one travel lane in each direction. So we won't be reducing the number of travel lanes along Broadway. So I don't know if that answers your first question.
Yeah, in that particular situation, parking would be the trade-off, as opposed to Broadway where we had a second travel lane.
And then to the what you're saying about parking in your businesses, we have certainly heard in our conversation with businesses that they have concerns about losing parking outside of the businesses and loading zones. So we're going to continue to work with them to find solutions that work best and prioritize where we can maintaining parking near businesses and especially accessible parking.
Yeah, and if I could add to a couple or over the last couple of years, the city conducted a parking study, and out of that, one of our priorities was to increase accessible parking by at least 5%, or to have at least 5% of parking spaces in commercial areas be accessible. So kind of in any of our opportunities to redesign the street, we look to kind of create new accessible spaces, along with just maintaining those or maintain the spots that are there at this time. Well, thanks, Sean. So I don't see any other hands raised at this time. So what I might do is just for a few more minutes, just refer to a couple of the chat questions that we didn't get to, and then start to close us out over the next 10 minutes. So one question we got is, if there is a protected bike lane in one direction and a bus lane in the other, could the protected bike lane be in the uphill direction?
Yes, yeah. So if we had a protected bike lane in one direction, maybe Kate, you know the answer to this, but I think we could have some flexibility to alternate sides of the street to prioritize going uphill if that was a preference.
I'll just chime in quickly and say that bus lanes are generally more effective going towards major intersections. So often what side those facilities are located on is more dependent on what's going to be more beneficial for the bus. For example, if you're looking at, let's just, Teal Square is slightly outside of the project scope, but let's just take Teal Square. The big benefit of having a bus lane there would be going into the square itself, right? From that section of Broadway, having a bus lane going out of the square wouldn't really provide a lot of additional value. So we would likely look first at how it's going to benefit the bus and then weigh that trade-off with what that means for cyclists and whether they would be forced to go uphill in the same direction as that bus bike lane.
Thanks. So some other questions we received were, I think there was just clarification on timeline. So are there any plans to make a smoother ride for both cars and bikes prior, aka fixing potholes prior to the project start in 2025?
So we won't be doing any paving work as part of this project before that construction window opens in 2025. But we would always encourage you to submit any pothole issues through 311, and DPW can do spot fixes outside of reconstruction projects like this. So yeah, continue to submit those maintenance requests, but in terms of full paving of the street, that wouldn't happen until the construction window for this project.
And for folks on sidewalks, you can also submit when there's when Greg showed the large sidewalk panel that was kind of uprooted from the tree, you can also submit that through 311, and our Department of Public Works will also evaluate the location and sometimes add asphalt just to make it smoother and less of kind of like all of a sudden a really intense tripping hazard. So that's another kind of stopgap in between reconstruction. Okay, I'm gonna do one more final question, then begin to close this up. Okay, so some of these, sorry, I'm just going through. So we had some questions that are outside the scope. So again, thank you for your questions on those. I'm just going to prioritize some for Broadway specific. So one question was around, is there any discussion around using transit signal priority to support reducing bus delay?
Yes, outside of the scope of this project, most likely, if we are able to incorporate any traffic signal work in this contract, it's more likely to be the types of equipment upgrades that would make it easier to cross as a pedestrian, you know, upgrading all those really old equipment at like Broadway North, for example. So it's not out of the question, but we've been working a lot with the MBTA in finding alternative funding sources and kind of tackling transit signal priority equipment upgrades kind of separately to these processes. So if it's something that we find ends up making sense and there's a lot of benefit at one particular intersection, you can be sure that we'll be reaching out to the MBTA to have that conversation. I don't want to say though that it's inherently part of the design. It is going to be dependent on a lot of things, like how much benefit is it providing at any given intersection, and is that one of our top priorities in the city versus a lot of other intersections that we have. So not necessarily guaranteed, but one of those things that we're definitely keeping in our initial conversations here is whether or not it makes sense.
Okay, we just got just 2 more questions that came in. If we could just take a little time to do. Laurent asked, did you already talk about options for EV charging infrastructure?
We have not discussed at this meeting EV charging infrastructure. I don't know if, Adam, would that be considered in scope for this?
Maybe Becca can chime in here too, but I think it kind of is along the same lines as the TSP equipment upgrades that I just mentioned. We do have a separate program that our Office of Sustainability and Environment runs to roll out new EV infrastructure. And so if they felt like this was a priority from that overall program perspective, we probably could find a way to make it a little bit easier when construction is happening to incorporate that versus, sort of automatically pulling it in. So it might be outside the scope of this project, but we could find ways to sync up with them and figure out how to make that happen potentially if we feel like that's something that is a priority to add.
Yeah, I think Adam, you hit the nail on the head with that one. I would just like to add that we are trying to work more with the Office of Sustainability for EV on-street EV charging stations, and this would be the time to start bringing up that conversation since it is becoming a more hot topic and more of a necessity. So this is a great time to bring that up. Thank you.
Thanks. And we have one more question this evening. Lena had described that, do you think that part of this planning process could involve outreach and events that benefit businesses in the short term and brings people up to the area to showcase what's already there? And it's a great question. And in our business outreach, we actually do that in collaboration with our city's economic development department, both to really kind of talk through what are resources available, what are your needs, what are the challenges you're facing, and what are some things that we can do that may not just be involved with the street design, but like could help support right now. And the city's economic development department is looking to do a kind of another round of resource or relief funding through the ARPA program. But that is something that we're definitely thinking about, that just because we're getting input on the street design doesn't mean that we can't then think through how do we connect folks to resources or folks to help connect to workforce development opportunities. So thank you all so much for asking your questions. Again, if we happen to miss it, our apologies, but what we'll do is go through all the questions and comments that we received and kind of highlight those at the next meeting, and make sure we've answered anything that we didn't get to today. Maybe Greg, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, and feel free to continue to ask us questions. Through the transportation@somervillema.gov email here, or through the regular 311 process. But yeah, to reiterate what Kate said, we really appreciate you all taking the time to learn more about the project and share your feedback with us. And this is really just the beginning of the process. Kate described some of the upcoming engagement activities and opportunities that will be part of this phase 1, where we're identifying issues. And we welcome you to continue to engage with us those ways. Please take the survey, come meet us at pop-ups, and then we'll continue on through that initial design phase, and everyone will have the opportunity to share feedback on that as well. So it's really going to be an iterative process. We are at the beginning here, and we're excited to make West Broadway better for everyone. So I hope you all have a good night.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And I'll just reiterate that folks expect an email from us probably in the next week with all of the meeting materials that we shared tonight. And if you have any questions, feel free to just email us right back off that email. And we look forward to just staying in dialogue. We hope you have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, team.